Hello, welcome to the 2015 Urban Water Management Plan Update webinar. On your right-hand side, you should be seeing an interface. You can use this interface at any time to prompt our producer, Morgan McVeigh, with any questions you may have on the webinar. We will answer all questions at the end. However, you may ask any question throughout as I'm speaking. My name is Aleksandar Metulev, and this is an update to a webinar we gave in February of this year. Now, the February webinar had a more section-by-section breakdown of the changes in the urban water management plans. However, this one will focus mostly on the changes that have come about since the release of the Urban Water Management Plan guidebook. If you have any technical difficulties throughout the whole process, you may call one of our dedicated crew members at 877-532-0806, and they will be happy to assist you. The main contacts for urban water management plans here at RMP will be Michael Sora, Stephanie Smith, Timothy Lee, and myself, Aleksandar Metulev. Now, throughout the whole webinar, I'll be using a lot of acronyms. From this point forwards, I will be referring to urban water management plans as UWMPs. Also, some important terms are American Water Works Association, Demand Management Measures, DMMs, Department of Water Resources, DWRs, Senate bills, Assembly bills, and also gallons per capita day. Now, in this presentation, we'll first go over the general applicability of UWMPs. Then we'll go over the changes since 2010. Mostly, we'll go over demand management DMMs, system water losses, and some optional elements. We will then follow up with the anticipated timeline, and then we'll go into Q&A. Main applicability. Now, the main goal of the UWMPs is to accomplish water supply planning over a 20-year period in 5-year increments, which is why the UWMPs need to be updated every 5 years. And who is required to submit a UWMP is all water suppliers that provide directly or indirectly water to 3,000 or more customers as direct customers, or provide more than 3,000 acre-feet annually to develop, adopt, and implement an urban water management plan. Now, there are some differences in between people providing 3,000 acre-feet of water and people providing directly to the customers. And that is differences in the regulations and what needs to be done. Now, there are differences between retailers and wholesalers. A wholesaler is the water supplier, either publicly or privately, that provides more than 3,000 acre-feet of water to wholesale for portable municipal purposes, so they could be providing to the retailers. Now, the retailers provide that water to the end users. Now, the end users can be anything from industrial buildings, landscape, households, anything that water goes to that can be a retailer. And as long as they provide to more than 3,000 end users, then they are required to submit a UWMP. Now, the requirements for the new guidebooks are slightly different than 2010 for retailers and wholesalers, and we'll go over more regarding that in a little bit. Now, this comparison table distinguishes the 2010 versus 2015 guidebook layouts. In the 2010, as you can tell, the guidebook consisted of 8 sections, 6 of which were mandatory and 2 were optional. The optionals are the ones that are denoted by the asterisks at the end of the section, such as climate change, a UWM checklist. And now for 2015, there is at least 9 sections, probably more, 3 of which are optional. Now, one thing to note is the introduction of Senate Bill X7-7, baselines and targets, in this section. The new thing for 2016 is that if you have not met Senate Bill X7-7, which is the deadline to reduce water by 20% by 2020, if you have not met certain targets from Senate Bill X7-7, you may not be eligible for any new state water grants or loans. And furthermore, everything that you see bolded in the 2015 column are sections that have been added or updated in the 2015 guidebook, such as the DMMs. There's been addition of standardized forms, and then the addition of energy intensity, which is a new Senate bill that has been introduced. Now, what have the changes that have happened since 2010? There have been three main bills that have been introduced. Now, in our February 2015 webinar, we talked more in detail about all the different elements for these three Senate for the Assembly bill and the two Senate bills. In this webinar, we'll mostly discuss the changes to the DMMs for Assembly Bill 2067, and then the distribution system water loss requirements for Senate Bill 1420. Now, if you were not aware, there is a new revised UWMP due date for July 1st, 2016 to account for the late release of the guidebook. Moving on, so let's talk about demand management measures. Now, in the 2010 regulations, the description of what was required for DMMs was very brief and very open-ended. With more open quote description of each water DMM that is currently being implemented or scheduled for implementation. That is the only thing that the supplier that was provided to us, end quote. Now for 2015 regulations, the description is a little bit more comprehensive. And then it effectively, the number of DMMs have been reduced from 14 to 7. Now this does not mean that there's less content needs to be less that needs to be performed. It just means that they have condensed the 14 DMMs into 7. For 2015, you're required to, open quote, narrative description that addresses the nature and extent of each water DMM implemented over the past 5 years, shall describe the water DMMs that the supplier plans to implement to achieve its water use targets. Now, what does this mean? Let's go over this more in detail. Now, the nature of the DMM program, you need to describe what the DMM program will do. For example, describe the dollar value for individual toilet replacements, if that is one of your programs. Or what's the content of a school education program. Furthermore, you also have to explain the extent, then quantify the implementation of the DMM. For example, the school program, how many schools have been, has this presentation been given to, how many children have been reached, also the number for the toilet replacement program, the number of customers that have been used, that have used the toilet rebate program, and so on and so forth. Now this is the list of the DMMs in 2015 versus 2010. As you can tell, it has been reduced. The number of DMMs may look smaller, but that does not mean it's less work. For example, if you look at subsections G and H of 2010 and subsection 4 of 2015, you can see that is pretty much the same thing, only in a condensed form. For the public information programs, the school education programs are now bunched together into the public education and outreach program. But many of the DMMs remain similar in nature, but many have been consolidated. Now, the differences that are required between urban retail water suppliers and wholesale water suppliers. All new 7 DMMs are required for retail water suppliers. However, that number drops down to 4 for the wholesale water suppliers and 2 other supplementary elements that wholesale water suppliers have to comply with. We can go into this in more detail if you'd like later. Now, let's go into system water losses. The system water losses, this amendment stems from the lack of knowledge regarding leaks within a water distribution system. It requires the UWMP to quantify and report on distribution system water loss over the most recent 12-month period. Now, the way that this is done is through the water audit method by the AWWA, found in Appendix L of the DWR guidebook. If you actually go on the awwa.org website, there is a Excel spreadsheet program that you can use as a nice little guide to the audit process. As a matter of fact, that spreadsheet will actually give you all the information, will spit out all the information that you need, and I will go over that in a little bit. Now, you must submit an electronic copy of the audit to the DWR using the DWR's online submittal tool. And then both the retail and wholesale agencies are required to fulfill the requirements of this section. Now, system water losses. These are high-level audit questions. Now, these are not necessarily the questions you need to ask during the audit, but these are the answers that you need to have. How much water has entered the system? How much water was used? For what purposes did you use that water? How much was lost? What are the types of water that loss that occurred? Some may be administrative, just on paper, or some may be real losses through leaks. What was the financial cost of the water losses? And then what was the volume of non-revenue water? And then the financial cost of non-revenue water. Now, if you use the Excel spreadsheet that the AWWA gives you, then you get this nice system comparison, which is called a water balance. This is essentially a graphical representation of the water audit and what it seeks to deduce. On the left-hand side, you have the total water supplied. Now, this is split up into authorized consumption and then what is known as water losses. Now, the water losses can go into apparent losses and real losses. Real losses are what's lost through leaks or any other physical losses, where apparent losses are stuff that have been lost through metering inaccuracies, unauthorized consumption, or data handling errors. Furthermore, for the authorized consumption, that is split up into what makes revenue for the city, which is the billed and then unbilled authorized consumption, which can be city parks or anything that does not pay for the water that they get. Now, this is all in the volumes, and it's just a note. And then, as you can tell, this is not up to scale, whereas the revenue water appears much smaller on the graph at 84 gallons versus the non-revenue water at 16 gallons. It's just the way that it's designed. Now, as I explained, the volume of deduction from the water balances is our volume of water losses, is differences between the water supplied into the system and the authorized consumption. The volume of apparent losses are paper losses. There are losses that are not physical in the system. They can be due to errors in the system, due to metering errors, or any data handling errors. The volume of real losses is physical leakage, and the volume of non-revenue water is the water that fails to generate revenue to the utility. Now, who should be the person to conduct this water audit? Now, this should be a dedicated person who is responsible for the completion of the water audit. Should be someone who has a general understanding of how the utility operates, is able to work with the appropriate people from all relevant departments to gather all the necessary data and all the necessary information, and then basic proficiency with Microsoft Excel and data management. As I said, the AWWA will provide you with the worksheet and all the audit documentation you need. It just needs to be filled out by someone that has a general understanding of how the utility operates and can use Excel. Now, this is an overview of the AWWA water audit software. You will need to register on the AWWA website before you can get to this spreadsheet. However, it's highly recommended that the spreadsheet be used. It is very helpful. Now, the timeline. It is now December of 2015. The guidebook has been released, and the deadline for submittal of the UWMPs is July 1st of 2016. However, we recommend that all work be done by late March, early April. And the reasons for this is that you need a public hearing. You need a public hearing of the UWMP 1 month prior to submittal, and you must give a public notice of said hearing at least 60 days prior to the hearing, which in this case must be done by April 1st of 2016. Now, you don't necessarily have to have the whole plan finished by April 1st. However, it is recommended prior to giving out the notice of the public hearing. We'll now go into questions, and Mr. Timothy Lee will assist me with any questions you might have.
In here from Colin Schultz at RMP. What happens if you miss the deadline of the UWMP of July 1st, 2016?
If you miss the July 1st deadline, you may, the one biggest issue you might have is you might be ineligible for any future grants or loans by the state, which could affect your overall deadlines of 2020, reduction of 20% by 2020. And that is the biggest issue you might come into by missing the July 1st deadline. All right, thank you very much. We will upload this webinar to our website within the next week once we finish editing. And thank you very much. It was a pleasure.